and it's a pleasure to be here as Pat Ford, the technical director of SFIA, has worked with me and developed some of the information that we have, including the handouts. There are, if you look in your GoToWebinar tab, you can open it up, and there's a little section on handouts. There should be 4 handouts that each of you can download. And if you want to take some time as we go through these housekeeping slides, we'll let you download those. You can follow along with those slides that you download. And there's also a couple of documents in there that are templates. So let's talk about evaluation reports. These are something that all of us that have been in the construction industry for any period of time, whether you're a manufacturer, installer, you've heard of these things. To some people, this is a type of extortion. To others, it's a great way to ensure that specified and installed products meet the building code. Some people think evaluation reports are a form of quality assurance, and this is true. But to others, it's not the best thing in the world. This presentation will dispel some of the myths about evaluation reports, let attendees understand better how the reports have been used, and take a look at how the reports should be used for the steel framing industry and the wall and ceiling industry. So our first learning objective is understand what code evaluation reports are and how they're used in the wall, ceiling, and framing industries. So let's say that you are working for a steel framing company, or let's say you're just an inventor and you come up with a new stud widget. You're hanging out with some of your buddies and you're having a few drinks and you get a napkin out and you start sketching. Wouldn't it be awesome if our industry had this thing? And you come up with this neat new product. Maybe it's a clip, maybe it's a joist, maybe it's an EQ stud, or maybe it's a methodology of installing the products that's something that's not explicitly permitted in the building code. So you take this great idea to your boss, you show them how it could have a positive impact on the market and make her lots of money. You get approval to do some research and testing, and you go to town. You start making product prototypes. This is fun, right? Product development is like origami, folding up pieces of paper to see how you can make this stuff. You reach out to your manufacturing guys, you talk to customers, you discuss the way the product or system could work for them. You tweak your product a little bit until it's the perfect thing that your customers can use. You bring in other engineers, testing services to run tests to find the optimum size and shape for the product. Talk to your manufacturing team to make sure it's something that they can do and still make it profitably. You look at packaging, you look at shipping, you look at all sorts of aspects of product development, and finally, you do testing on the final product to make sure that you get good values that work for engineers that are designing buildings and builders that are trying to install this thing. So now you have these test reports from your third-party testing agency, but because it's a proprietary product, you don't want to publish all this proprietary test results and information to the rest of the world who could potentially copy your product. So rather than publishing it publicly to everyone, you send your testing and manufacturing data off to a third-party evaluation service. These evaluation services are sworn to confidentiality, and they review your product and your data for code compliance. Sometimes when the product is really new or different, it's not necessarily clear what part of the building code or the product needs to comply with. Sometimes the evaluation services will make helpful suggestions as to what code compliance means for these products, but quite often they'll ask you to help develop what they call acceptance criteria or evaluation criteria so that similar products with similar processes can be evaluated to these criteria to show that they meet the building code. An example of these are shown on the next slide. Those of you who have been in the steel framing industry for a while know acceptance criteria AC10 for quality documentation and AC86 and AC46 for framing members. So sometimes there's already an acceptance criteria in place, or the evaluation service you're using has protocols already set up for similar products, and therefore your testing and test results need to meet those protocols. Quite often, it makes a lot more sense checking with evaluation services before you do the testing of your new product, because if you don't and your testing does not meet the evaluation criteria, you may have to do your test over again. And I have seen this happen to manufacturers before, and they get very angry at these evaluation services because tests are not cheap. So once you know what criteria you have to meet, run your tests, send your results and some money to your chosen evaluation service. They review your product, ask some questions, potentially ask for more testing, always ask for more money, discuss any issues they have, and then perform an engineering review of your product and the data. At some point, they will issue you a draft report, and that's an exciting day when your draft report comes through. You excitedly review the report to see if it's what you need, and if so, you send your final payment, and boom, you have a report that you can publish showing that your product complies with the versions of the building code or codes that you requested the evaluation service to evaluate. Yes, this seems like a somewhat convoluted and sometimes time-consuming process, but it's faster than submitting code changes and getting the version of the code that contains information about your product adopted. It's my understanding that in Europe, there's a little bit easier process, but we found in North America that this evaluation service process does a decent job of getting products to show code compliance a little sooner than code development and adoption. So now, as a manufacturer, you have your innovative new product and you're ready to send it out to the marketplace. You give it to your sales team. You create online and paper copies of load tables, some of which may already be in your evaluation report. You make videos about your product and post them on social media. You go to trade shows and show your widget to customers. You create installation instructions, how-to videos, framing details, and get testimonials from contractors saying how great it is having this product in the marketplace. Before getting your product approved to use on jobs, you have to get it specified by architects, engineers, and specification writers. So you go visit architects and engineers to get your product in their specifications. And you bring copies of your evaluation report with you as handouts. You may even buy architects lunch and tell them funny stories so they remember you and your product. You may have some template language for their specifications so they can cut and paste and incorporate in their specification. You tell them to include in their specifications a requirement for specific evaluation reports on this type of product. This is great for new and innovative products, but what has become problematic is that this has become the norm for all products, even standard products such as the standard studs and tracks that are made and used every day. So before we look at what it means to be code approved, let's look at the reason why there is a building code in the first place. As you see here, the code is to establish minimum requirements for building systems to safeguard the public health, safety, and general welfare. To do this, it addresses multiple aspects of building safety, including structural strength and even energy conservation. It does this in some cases with prescriptive provisions, spelling out exactly how a system is to be assembled, or performance-related provisions stating that the system must perform to a certain minimum level, even if the way something is built is left up to the architect, engineer, or contractor. An example of a performance specification is something like the deflection limits that are found in IBC Chapter 16, like L over 360 for brittle elements and stucco, and L over 240 for more flexible elements. An example of prescriptive requirements are like the stud to track gap, which are set in AISI S240. So, what is code approved? Definitions are in Chapter 2 of the Building Code. And what is the definition of approved? Well, it's right there in Chapter 2, and it's simple: acceptable to the building official. And in Chapter 1, the code tells us how these approved materials are to be constructed and installed in accordance with the approval by the building official. But where do I find the specific options for something that's not necessarily in the code? Well, and the other question is, where are evaluation reports mentioned in the code? Let's look at Section 104, which gives the duties and powers of the building official. Section 104.2.3 is specific to alternative materials, design, and methods of construction. We will see these three items: materials, design, and methods of construction multiple times, so I've underlined them here. And 104.2.3 says alternative materials, design, and methods of construction and equipment. The provisions of this code are not intended to prevent the installation of any material or to prohibit any design or method of construction not specifically prescribed by the code, provided that any such alternative has been approved. Well, what does approved mean? Oh wait, we learned that definition, and the definition is in Chapter 2, is acceptable to the building official. All right, So, continuing with section 104.2, an alternative material design or method of construction, those three items again, shall be approved where the building official finds that the proposed alternative is satisfactory. And then in 104.233, an alternative material design or method of construction shall comply with the intent of the provisions of this code. Gee, what is the intent? Well, again, it's up to the building official. And then equivalency criteria. And these criteria are something that if we do decide to have maybe a poll question later on in this presentation, you might want to know these things, but you don't know. We may not have that. Equivalence criteria is an alternative material which shall, for the purpose intended, be not less than the equivalent of that prescribed in this code with respect to all of the following. First, quality, strength, effectiveness, durability, safety, and fire safety. So when an evaluation service or a code official is taking your widget and looking at it and says, hey, does this thing meet the code? These are the 6 criteria they use. And there's obviously sub-criteria under those, but these are the 6 items that the building code says that these items have to meet to show that they are equivalent or acceptable to be in the building code. So here's how you determine compliance. One way to do it is through reports. 104.236 is entitled reports, and it has 2 sections underneath it. 104.236.1 is called evaluation report. So this is the meat. It describes what the evaluation reports are. It talks about alternate material designs and methods of construction, and it talks about what an approval agency has to do. So you can read that yourselves or look at the handouts. One thing that doesn't get talked about very much is what's in 104.2362 other reports. People just kind of skip over there and say this is an important part of the building code. But several years ago, I worked for a manufacturer that had a proprietary product. It wasn't specifically accepted by the building code, so they went out and they got third-party testing done. But instead of saying, look, it's a proprietary product, they got it patented, but they said, I'm going to take this third-party testing, and if someone says they need to have an evaluation report, we'll just go ahead and send the full test report to them. There was a summary cover page. I drew up some things. There was a third-party inspection that was involved with it as well. But most of the time when I sent that test out, people said, okay, this is good enough. We don't need a test report. And that was done under section 104.2362 other reports. And there was an engineer seal on it. It wasn't mine. It was the engineer that did the testing. Seal was on it. And it says at the very end, the building official is authorized to require design submittals to be prepared by and bear the stamp of a registered design professional. So that's what that manufacturer product did, and it worked well for them. Now, what I did in preparation for this presentation was go through the building code and find every place that said evaluation reports, and I was quite surprised at finding way back in Appendix K, Administrative Provisions, is the section on prefabricated construction that mentions evaluation reports 3 separate times. And this is something that the International Code Council is really getting into, is they're embracing prefab, modular, panelized, and they're trying to regulate it. They've got 2 specific codes specifically for prefab and modular. They've got a guidelines on panelization that they've recently published. And one of the things when I reviewed that guideline on panelization is it looked like they were trying to require panel evaluation reports for every panel that goes out where it's enclosed, where you can't see what's inside the panel. And I understand that building officials, which are the consumers of ICC documents, and the association, the International Code Council Association, is an association of building officials, but it becomes very onerous to manufacturers. So again, be aware that this is back in the appendix. It's a non-mandatory appendix, so it's not necessarily a part of the building code, but just be aware that these kind of things are in there and that people will be looking for evaluation reports potentially on panels. All right, so I think we've satisfied learning objective 1 on what are evaluation reports. Let's cover 2 learning objectives at the same time. 2, know when an evaluation reports are not required on standard code approved framing projects. And number 4, show where standard products are listed in building codes and code reference documents from AISI and ASTM International. So let's get in the Wayback Machine and go back to 1973. Most of you weren't even born then, but in 73, there was not one international building code. Across the United States, where there were 3 codes, and down here in the South, I'm in Georgia right now, there was the Southern Standard Building Code. So I was about 10 years old when this thing came out in 73. It had some interesting things in it, but it looked a lot like the code does now. Title, scope, organization, tests, permits, fees, what the building officials are supposed to do. Chapter 15 was steel construction. You can see that there's structural steel construction, cold form carbon and low alloy steel construction, light gauge, GAGE, cold form stainless steel construction, open web joist, and welding, and that's it for the steel chapter. Now, if you go a little bit further in there, you get concrete, you get wood construction, you get to chapter 18, you get to gypsum wallboard, and in the chapter on gypsum wallboard is where you see section 1807, application of light gauge, GAUGE, steel studs, and 1808, allowable partition heights. And these are very short sections in the code. As a matter of fact, I'll show the entire section to you right here on the screen. It's basically one sentence for section 1807, and then 1808 are allowable partition heights. And if you look in the footnotes, you'll see that these are in fact composite heights, and they're really not that different from some of the composite tables that we have now in both manufacturer's literature and in ASTM standards. So again, these are, it says the tabulated heights are based on 25 gauge steel studs. Who knows how thick that was back in 1973, but that's what they're based on. So fast forward to today. This is the 2024 International Building Code. Again, the content starts off with scope, definitions, occupancy classification, and then a series of materials starting with chapter 19. Concrete, aluminum, masonry, steel is chapter 22, wood, glass, gypsum, and plastic. We're going to spend a little bit of time today in both chapter 22 on steel and chapter 25 on gypsum. So looking more closely at chapter 22 on steel, section 2204 is cold form steel, and 2206 is cold form steel light frame construction. So this is where you initially are going to go to find information about cold form steel. But before we go there, I want to tell you, I went and bit the bullet and got a PDF copy of the code and a paper copy of the code. And like a lot of books do, in the back, they put little advertisements in the back about their whatever services or products they sell. But one of the things that's under the umbrella of the International Codes Council is International Code Council Evaluation Service, ICCES. Their advertisement says specify and approve with confidence. And this is one of the benefits of being under the same umbrella as the International Code Council is you get to put your ads right there in the back of the building code. I mentioned that I'd gotten the guidelines on advanced panelization. And when I got the advanced panelization guidelines, there was an advertisement in the back for NTA. NTA has recently been acquired by International Code Council and has been folded into ICCES. So these are just 2 of a bunch of agencies that are out there that do evaluation reports. But I just want to let you know that these guys are under the umbrella of ICC, and they certainly market that to people. But these are just some of the agencies that are out there that do evaluation reports. I think most of the folks in our industry are aware of ICCES, Intertech, which is holds the reports for SFIA, Bureau Veritas, not as well known in our industry, but again, does a lot of reports in other industries. IAPMO, QAI, UL Solutions, NTA, again, I mentioned earlier, and Dr. J. A lot of these are kind of niche evaluation services. They cater to specific industries. But again, all of them write evaluation reports under those criteria that I was mentioning in section 104 of the building code. So let's get into when are evaluations reports not required. This is kind of what we want, right? If you got a product that is standard and it's not something special, something that you've drawn up on a napkin and said, hey, maybe this will help the industry, something that has been in the building code for a while, and it meets it's in one of these areas: materials, design, and methods of construction. We'll talk about materials in a little bit. I want to focus on design and methods of construction together because they're kind of addressed the same way in the code. So evaluation reports are not required on design and methods of construction when it's traditional construction. For example, you look in the wood chapter, you'll find a table like this one on allowable spans for plywood and OSB, and you can see that this is based on, if you look at the footnote B, see Doc PS1 for plywood species groups. I've got the cover of DOC for Department of Commerce, PS1, which is voluntary product standard number 1. And again, this is a standards not required, but if it meets the standardization that is in this PS1, then it's acceptable as part of the building code. It's considered a traditional building material. Okay, the next way is if it's spelled out in the code. So something that I didn't get to, which is kind of the catch-all for some of these weird systems that don't have their own chapter, is chapter 31, Special Construction is the title of the chapter. And back in the 2015 International Building Code, it had a very short scope statement. It included things like membrane structures, temporary structures, pedestrian walkways, a couple other things, and so it was fairly limited. But now you fast forward to the 2024 IBC, you see it includes a lot more things. It still includes the membrane structures and temporary structures, but things like swimming pools, spas and hot tubs, energy systems, greenhouses, intermodal shipping containers. Who would have thought back in 2015 that we would be building enough with intermodal shipping containers that would have its own section in the building code? So again, this has grown, and this is the type of thing where evaluation reports might have been required if somebody was building with shipping containers back in 2015, but now by 2024, hey, this is in the building code, so I don't need to have an evaluation report for this shipping container structure anymore, depending on what you do to it. And there are some caveats and some limitations. And then the third method where evaluation reports are not required is when the method or method of construction or the design is on the approved document sealed by the design professional. And this is just a little corner off of a drawing. I find it strange that this is engineered drawings, but it's got a stamp and seal from an architect. But again, it says document sealed by a design professional. It doesn't really give the details. I know the state laws a lot of times will say what kind of design professional has to sign and seal these things. So that's design, that's methods of a construction. Let's look at materials. And if the code or reference standard shows standardized properties or performance criteria or both for materials, and we're going to look at two different types of steel framing, structural members and non-structural members. Structural members have a minimum thickness of 33 mils and up, and they have certain limitations on how much loads could be put on non-structural members. So those thicker materials can only go into structural walls that experience exterior wind loads or gravity loads from up above. So I've kind of color coded this. I've put the green color as the CFS structural members, and there's a violet or purple color that's the CFS non-structural members. But in the International Building Code, section 2206, cold form steel light frame construction, this is where it references AISI S240. And it specifically calls out AISI S240 as being applicable to floor and roof systems, structural walls, shear walls, strap brace walls, diaphragms that resist in-plane lateral loads, and trusses. So again, a little laundry list might be good for you to know what these things are: the floor and roof systems, wall systems, lateral systems, and trusses. Also in this, where it references AISI S240, this is a free download, by the way, from AISI. If you go to cfsei.org, there's a little icon on there that says free AISI standards. You can click on that and get PDFs of all these documents. So this is just one of them. AISI S240 is the one for structural cold form steel, and AISI S220 is for non-structural steel. And the place to see where all these standards are that are referenced in the building code is back in chapter 35. And chapter 35 has associations listed by name alphabetically. So AISI, American Iron and Steel Institute, is kind of towards the beginning. There's a whole bunch of ASTM standards. AWCI even has a standard for inspection of intumescent thin-filmed spray-on fireproofing that is referenced in the code. So it comes slightly after AISI. But this lists all of the standards starting with S100. It's got the 200 series and even S400 for lateral, which are in here. But we're going to talk primarily about S240 for structural and then S220 for non-structural. And the nice thing about Chapter 35 is it tells you where in the building code S240 is referenced. So within S240, it gives some general information in Chapter A, but Chapter A is where A5.6 is standard shapes. So we went to Chapter 22 of the building code. It references S240 for structural members. S240 in section I5.6 has standard shapes, and here they are. And it's got a C section, it's got a track, it's got a U channel, angle, furring channel, and then for the studs and tracks, it gives tables for standard dimensions. Now there's some non-standard dimensions that go outside of this, but again, this is all spelled out in the building code. So if someone asks you for an evaluation report on a standard stud or track product, you say, wait a minute, this is nice, standard flat steel, punch outs meet the punch out limitations that are in S240, the dimensions meet the dimensions of this table, the thicknesses meet the thicknesses that are in these tables. So it's not an issue. I shouldn't have to have an evaluation report. So this is kind of the limitations on structural. I'm getting ready to move into non-structural, but if you have questions about this, type it in the chat, and hopefully I'm moving fast enough that we'll have a little time for questions at the end, and I'll stay on as long as I need to answer any questions you might have. So one thing I will point out that even though it was referenced multiple times in the 73 code, nowhere in the AISI S240 document does it use the term gauge, except for in the title of some of the reference standards in the back and the research reports. Really, it gives thickness in either designation thickness, minimum base steel thickness, or design thickness. And what we encourage people to use when they're ordering and specifying steel, either the designated thickness, designation thickness, or this minimum base steel thickness in inches. All right. Back to Chapter 35, now we're looking at non-structural members in IBC, and Chapter 35 references AISI S220, the North American standard for cold form steel non-structural framing. Now, one thing that I didn't mention earlier, this applies to ASTM standards as well as AISI, is throughout the building code does not include the year. So you have to go back to Chapter 35 to see what year that standard is. But make sure you do that, because as they update standards, ASTM standards sometimes get updated multiple times a year. And so you want to make sure that you've got the right version, that you're complying with the right version, because some of these things change around as to what they reference and what the requirements are. But in the 2024 IBC, it's AISI S220, the 2020 version, and it is referenced in sections 2206.2, 06.3, which we're going to look at right now, and also a couple tables we'll talk about on a few slides later. So let's go to 2206.2. Non-structural members for cold form steel light frame construction. The design and installation of non-structural members connections shall be in accordance with AISI S220. And it also, when it comes to 2206.3 with cutting and notching, it references S240 for structural and S220 for non-structural. Back to Chapter 35. And we look, in addition to those in Chapter 22, there's two references in Chapter 25, two table references. So we look at those tables, Chapter 25, 2506.2 standards. Gypsum panel products shall conform to the appropriate standards listed in 2506.2 and Chapter 35, and where required for fire protection shall conform to the provisions of Chapter 7. And look right there, the fourth line, cold form steel studs, tracks, non-structural, shall comply with AISI S220. And just right above it, it says cold form steel studs and tracks structural will comply with AISI S240. The same thing with the table for lathing and plastering standards. The fourth line, cold form steel studs and track, non-structural, and the third line, cold form steel studs and track, structural. So this is your path to follow through of exactly where in the building code you can go through and get reference to AISI S220 and S240. And one other location for non-structural is in table 2508.1, an installation of gypsum construction. At the very bottom, it says steel framing for gypsum panel products. It's ASTM C754, that's the one for non-structural installation, and ASTM C1007 for structural installation. So we're talking about non-structural here. ASTM C754 is the standard specification for installation of steel framing members to receive screw-attached gypsum products. it references both AISI S220 and ASTM C645. So if you look at ASTM C75420, which is the one that's referenced in the code, it has in the references over on the right-hand side, and I put red circles around them, ASTM C645 and AISI S220. Now, the reason I bring up ASTM C645 is C645 is still in a lot of architectural specifications, and ASTM C645 also has this nice little drawing giving the dimensions of a standard member. So when I was working for a stud manufacturer and we provided regular studs, not EQ studs, and most all steel framing manufacturers still make non-EQ studs, we'd submit this, people would ask us for an evaluation report or test data, and we would say, no, it's not needed. It is a standard product. It's referenced in the building code. It's referenced in ASTM C645, and here's this diagram that shows the exact dimensions of the studs that we just sent to you. Also in C645, there's this table, which is not all of the framing members, but they call it minimum section properties for various studs. And basically by making this configuration, you meet these section properties that are in this table. So in S220 itself, you look at the table of contents like we did with S240. Section A6 is products. It's got information on the thickness, flange width, product designator, manufacturing tolerances, product identification, performance requirements, marking requirements, all the things that manufacturers have to do to make that a standard product, and you shouldn't need an evaluation report for it. So what do you do when you have a specification says, okay, you've got to provide a report? Even worse, sometimes they don't say you can get a report from any of these agencies. It says specifically you have to have an ICCES report. See, that advertising they're doing the building code, back to the building code, is paying off for them. Well, these are 2 letters, and these are part of your handouts. The one on the left is a letter template for non-structural steel stud and track framing. The one on the right is a letter template for structural steel stud and track framing. Basically, it explains, I put all the stuff in highlight that you can pull out and put your own customer's information in there, your own project name in there, your own name at the very bottom. But it lets you know that because this standard member is our standard products, they do not require, nor do we maintain, ICCES evaluation reports on these members. Then it goes on to talk about a little bit about what evaluation reports are, what these evaluation services do, where in the building code, basically what I just went through for both non-structural and structural members, where you can find this information. And then I added a little bit of a paragraph at the end of the letter on the left, the non-structural letter, to point out that there are several products where they've used higher yield strength, ribs, bends, embossments, and dimples to allow thinner steel to be used to provide the same strength and stiffness as standard studs, but the framing members referenced above do not fall into that category. So please don't try and use these letters for EQ studs. Those do require evaluation reports because they are non-standard. They don't by themselves, without the evaluation reports, without the testing, meet the building code. So for EQ studs, these letters don't apply. Ask your manufacturers for evaluation reports, and in most cases, it's already on their websites. So we've done learning objectives 1, 2, and 4. Let's go back and get learning objective 3, which is identify when evaluation reports are required on non-standard framing products. So if you're in AISI S220, S240, but you don't meet the minimums, then what you have to do is request reports. So first let's talk about clips and accessories. This is only for products that cannot be calculated in accordance with AISI S100. If you've got an angle and you're using that angle in a way that is transferring load, so you can calculate the shear, you can calculate the pull out of the fasteners, you can calculate the pullover of the head of the fasteners. There's even some CFSCI tech notes out there to help you calculate that for just a standard basic clip angle, then it's typically not a problem. But if you've got something special, like these header clips that you see in the center picture, this box of twist clips that are in the lower left, this hold down that isn't installed right because somebody didn't put any screws where this punch out is, all those are going to require some type of evaluation report to show that they can carry the loads and perform in a way that is in accordance with the building code. So This is where you have to have the reports, is where you have these specialty products or something, as I was pointing out in the letter, you've got a non-standard stud or maybe a non-standard joist that has these big stiffened punch outs, or there's a couple of them out there where it's not a typical C shape. It's more like an I-beam shape and has top flange bearing or something other accessories in it to make it more useful for the contractors. So very quick, very short section that we talked about there, and we're going to move on to learning objective 5. Understand the role of third-party certification programs in the evaluation report process. So what value do evaluation services provide and bring to the table when you're trying to do this thing? When you come up with this little clip and you want to sell it in the marketplace and you want to get it out there, how does having a report like what you see on the screen help you when you have a non-standard product? So there's a lot of ways that this can happen. First of all, it shows compliance to multiple requirements for multiple jurisdictions. Some of these jurisdictions have special requirements and have special reports that are required. The city of Los Angeles doesn't accept just any product for use, and they don't just accept an evaluation report. So it's easier to get a city of Los Angeles report if you've got an evaluation report, and that's usually the path that manufacturers take, but it's not automatic. So it helps you get a special report for that jurisdiction. In the state of Florida, there's high velocity hurricane zones along hurricane ocean line in the Gulf Coast. And to get those reports, sometimes you have to, having an evaluation report helps you move to the next step and get those reports that you need down in Florida. There's other local and international codes. On the example that I'm showing right here, I believe it's from Scottsdale Construction Systems. You can see over here the evaluation scope, and then it says the third one, the 2013 Abu Dhabi International Building Code, ADIBC. So even international codes these things can comply with. And then just above the box right here, they've got some similar evaluation reports, ESR 1538 AU for Australian codes and ESR 1538 NZ for New Zealand codes. So yes, this is one of the cases where the International Code Council is in fact evaluating it to international codes. It can provide both old and new codes. And again, on this example, you can see under item number 1, evaluation scope, compliance with the following codes. It goes all the way back from the 2021 code to 2018, 2015, and 2012 International Building Code, and even several versions of the International Residential Code. So again, old and new codes. So an evaluation service can provide a bridge between product development and acceptance in code. An example would be powder actuated fasteners. Years ago, all the manufacturers of powder actuated fasteners, it was not something that was in the building code or not something that was in the AISI standards. They always had to have an evaluation report. Now, AISI has a special section on powder actuated fasteners for cold form steel connections to things like structural steel. So that section is in the code. Now, most of the manufacturers still have their evaluation reports because there's other items and other things that are fastened. So, for example, what's an AISI doesn't apply to things like structural steel to structural steel, or wood to structural steel, or structural steel or wood to concrete. So all those items are not covered in there. But cold form steel to concrete, cold form steel to cold form steel or structural steel, those are covered in AISI. So if you're just making products that have that limited scope, you may not have to have an evaluation report. So again, this is where something has eventually made its way into the codes and no longer needs the report. I hate to talk about this, but as AWCI, I still have to. Cross-laminated timber. This is something we've seen a huge amount of marketing and questionable green advertising about this, but it has made it into the building code. So all these products which originally had evaluation reports so that they could be used on jobs, now it's right there written into the code so that conceivably in certain applications, they don't require evaluation reports. So what's another value that's provided? Marketing. I showed this picture earlier of the guys at the trade show showing their new clip or widget and trying to sell it to people. They market it to architects and engineers. They market to customers. And so in marketing, having that evaluation report is something that says, yes, you've done your homework. you've done this testing, and some third-party body, some evaluation service has shown that this is good and in compliance with the code. And of course, it helps with product development. I've found that in my years in product development, when I'm coming up with something and I'm talking to these evaluation services, they can help guide me into, number one, how to do the testing, where that testing is going to apply to specific code provisions, and what part of the code I may want to have my report involved in, right? Are we going to do it to compliance to this section or this other section? And so the code evaluation services has engineers on staff. A lot of times they send these engineers to the code development. I've met some of these people through my participation in AISI and soon to be through SFIA. So they help with this. And they help you understand the code requirements. They help you understand the nuances between the different code versions and interpretations, right? Well, if I've gotten this already approved for the 2018 building code, what changes, if any, are I going to have to make to get this approved for the 2021? A lot of times it's nothing, but sometimes there are some slight differences. So there's some things. Now, there's probably a lot of other values that evaluation services provide. So what I'm asking you as participants is type into the chat, type in the questions, maybe some other things that you've seen where the evaluation services have helped you out or helped your company out, or maybe you're an installer and something that you've seen in a report has helped you install a product correctly, and we'll get Tao or Meredith to read those comments when we get to the Q&A session at the end. And finally, we're at item 6, discern what companies provide evaluation reports and how these reports can be successfully used to streamline the submittal process on non-standard products. So we've already talked about these agencies. We've shown what they are. I've shown this exact same slide. It's not necessarily clear from this which one you would want to go to, but how do these guys get certified? And they get certified through certification bodies. And certification bodies, they have to show that they meet accreditation to ISO IEC 17065, which is minimum requirements for bodies certifying products, processes, and services. So I just went in. You can go to these people's websites. They've got a copy of their certification. They've got a date on it that says, okay, based on this date, this time, this organization has been certified. I've got a couple of them here. The one on the top is from Intertech. The one behind it is for Dr. J Engineering. The one on the top is done through the International Accreditation Service, which is also a part of ICC, International Code Council. And the one behind it is through ANSI, National Accreditation Board. So basically these meet ISO IEC 17065. And then the next question is, okay, I want to get a report. I'm wondering which one of these guys have evaluated products for my industry. Well, what you could do is you can go on some of their web pages. This is the IAS web page, so it talks about product certification agencies, and you can click on search product certification agencies. Also, under important documents, it says accreditation criteria, and it's got, you could download this, which is the criteria for product certification agencies. So this is what ICCES, IAPMO, Intertech, all of these agencies that provide these evaluation service reports, this is what they have to comply with, this AC 370, or at least if they're going to get accreditation through IAS, this is the acceptance criteria that they have to meet. So let's say that I'm looking for a report. Where have others in the CFS industry gone for these reports? Well, I'm showing you two web pages here. The one on the left is Intertech. I've left the URL up at the top of the screen. The one on the right is ICCES. What they do is you could search by company, you can search by a listing category. What I tend to do is search by CSI code. So you can see on the left, I've typed in 054,000 for cold form metal framing. On the right-hand side, I've done the same thing. They give you two choices in ICCES. You can either go to the reports directory, or the tab that I'm showing is reports arranged by CSI number. And so again, gone into 54,000 cold form metal framing and go down. So you'd see the first ones listed are Hilti, Newcastle, Clark Dietrich. In the ones under ICCES, in the ones under Intertech, you can see Simco, CGK, and there's a bunch more. You can scroll down the page. The next slide is going to show some of these reports themselves. So the one on the left is the one that we saw earlier from Scottsdale. The one on the right is SCAFCO. It's kind of interesting that SCAFCO has added on here additional manufacturers. So you can see Quail Run, United Metal Products, Confab. They're all a part of this report. So these are different manufacturing facilities, and typically on the evaluation report itself, it gives the listing of where the manufacturing facilities are. It tells you what code they're recognized under. So you can see down here, 2018, 2015, and 2012 International Building Code. And the two places you can usually find these are on the manufacturer's website and also on the evaluation services website. I was able to go to Intertech and UL and get these reports. The one on the left is for, I believe, Merino Ware. It's held by Ware Industries. The one on the right is they didn't have that many under 5,400 in UL, but I found this on Evolution Deck. So it was under 54,000, which seemed kind of unusual. But but again, these are just 4 examples of the reports that you'll find from our industry. So I've got 49 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 10 minutes for question and answer. We've made it to the last slide, covered all 6 of our learning objectives. Feel free to contact me, it's right here.